Hello and welcome to episode 51 of Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, a podcast that we started a year ago after the Brighton Meaning Conference and have kept going and triumphantly have nearly up to our first year of episodes. My name's Michael Forrest.
My name's Ivanka Magic.
And this week we thought we'd talk about meaning. It's a grand subject we hadn't actually explicitly talked about yet. Why do we need meaning, I suppose, is a place to start. And then what has meaning for each of us, and maybe try and understand what has meaning for other people, and, see how much time people actually get to think about the meaning in their lives, because I'm not sure it's that much.
No. My problem this week has been that I've been all consumed by the next edition of the Politics World Cup that has been played out in America land. And I have thought about that a lot, and the meaning of that, and where we are. So yes, that's been what I've been.
Well, I think that just exposes that. Meaning is something that we actually don't think about enough or very much.
Yes.
So that's what this podcast is about, thinking about stuff we don't think about very much that may be difficult to think about. How's it going, Ivanka?
It's going very well, Michael. I am enjoying my project that I'm working on for the Wellcome Trust. It is very interesting. I'm thinking about how science becomes part of policy.
Okay.
Which is brilliant for me. Very interested in it as a topic. Never really thought about it or been able to do a project around it in a professional setting. I'm getting to speak to lots of extremely top of their game scientists, doctors, clinicians. So I've had to really be focused on these conversations. I had to use a research interview a clinical psychiatrist who surely must be far more skilled than me in the art of qualitative interviewing. So that made me really be attentive. Not that I'm not always attentive, but it made me beforehand go, oh my God. Had all those moments of self-doubt. But we had a really brilliant conversation. I have spoken to people who spend all their time researching like the proteins in muscles. One of the people I interviewed yesterday spent 40 years studying muscle proteins, particularly the heart. One thing that's changed a lot in science in the last 20, 30 years is that the techniques are so much more refined. There's been some significant breakthrough in techniques and understanding so that the depth of the question and the depth of the understanding has increased massively. So even though a discovery might be, or sort of an implication of understanding how something works might be years old, decades, even 100 years old, the actual explanation of it has now reached a level of granularity and detail where there's no doubt. Because one of the things the Wellcome Trust talk about a lot is vaccinations. And this particular clinician that I interviewed, he was like, look, all the data for vaccines is there. There is nothing, we're done. We know about vaccines. We just need to vaccinate. There's no, this is not the answer to the vaccination thing is not in science anymore. It's in policy. It's in persuading. The quote from his was persuading Luddite politicians that they need to actually take it up. So personally, I'd happily talk to these people for hours about the actual area of study, but that's not what I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to understand not the particular nature of their area of expertise, but rather understanding the process. So I'm not just talking to scientists, I'm also talking to people who work in policy, civil servants, people who actively are policymakers. So, yeah. It's really quite interesting.
Sounds meaningful.
It is meaningful, exactly.
Very meaningful.
Very meaningful.
I'm proud of you for having something so meaningful to do.
Thank you.
Have you heard about this Measure B thing in California? It sounds like it's a banking alternative, so that instead of people's money going into banks where it then gets lent out to, to buy weapons and do God knows what, cigarettes, and however they're investing all this money that they've got of yours. Apparently like 50% of public money in California goes directly to bankers. So there's this Measure B thing, which if I've understood it right, I was listening to it on Harmontown where the guy was talking about it and he was getting into it, and then Dan Harmon was being drunk and kind of like derailed the explanation by wanting to turn it into a rap. And it was like, I kind of wanted to just hear what this thing was. But yeah, so the idea is I think it's like a public bank.
Right.
So that the government gets to kind of hold on to the money and invest it in, stuff that the public need, rather than it just going into the private sector and kind of lost to kind of nefarious industries. Which sounds like quite a good idea, doesn't it?
Does sound like a good idea. You certainly need to try. Which reminds me, because I was about to go, public money. I was about to do mimic a libertarian talking about how that being in the public purse will never be as efficient as it being in the private sector. Then on Wednesday morning, I did a thing that I think you would be really proud of. I was on Facebook, and I've got loads of groups that I've signed up to. One's a zero waste group, and somebody put on. So I went up to the university first thing in the morning and helped my sister with something, and I was getting the train back into town. And I said to, I was looking on Facebook, and somebody had gone, "Hi, anyone think of a really good name for a zero waste company?" And the first comment on it was, "Impossible. All it's going to do is rip us off." So I literally, because I was waiting for the train, just replied, "Well, aren't you a ray of sunshine?" and the guy came back, "What? Prove me wrong." And I said, "Oh, no, thank you." I said, "I was merely commenting on the dismissive and dark nature of your comment. I'm not interested in, debating it." And he went, "You're right. I'll delete my comment." And deleted his comment. Get in.
Good work. Kind of like one at a time. I've got a note here. If you let them stir in this doubt, you get paralysis, which was obviously a very important point to me at one point. But no, it was in response to me going, Brexit solves nothing.
Yeah.
And then a guy going, well, I think it does solve some things maybe. And I was like what? No, it doesn't. It doesn't solve anything. And also hearing about the fact that Paul McCartney, I didn't realise, had said that he didn't vote on Brexit because he was too confused. It was like, and also Ringo voted Leave. So this is all very disappointing. But this kind of balance in the media and always sort of having someone with an opposing view without really representing how much of a crank they are in the process, you're sort of stirring in doubt into stuff that really doesn't need any flipping doubt stirred into it. But it's quite hard to feel like a reasonable person if you take such a hard line. If you feel like you're taking a really hard line on something, that maybe there are questions, maybe something's not perfect, but if you let them stir in that doubt, then you just can't operate, you can't function, you can't make a decision anymore, and you sort of just become apathetic. So I think sometimes the only way to actually be able to take any action is to sort of override and attack those forces of sort of diluting, and I don't know, you can't act if you don't have a certain amount of certainty, and that's one of the worst things that the media is responsible for, is this sort of erosion of any kind of faith in anything or belief in anything. Not that, we should necessarily have blind faith in anything. People aren't taught how to deal with that sort of thing. And people don't know, I don't think. I don't think anyone sort of understands the list of logical fallacies and all that kind of thing. I don't know if maybe they are teaching it a bit more now, but I really think people need to start becoming more aware of what sort of arguments are misused and sort of bad. Just calling out bad faith arguments, I think, would be a really big thing. Those reporters, Trump going, "You're rude, you're a very rude man," talking to these reporters. I kind of and now that I've sort of listened to some discussion on CNN, I sort of wanted him to say, well, it's not my job to be polite to you, and if I was, then I would just be propaganda for you. So,
I mean, there was an interesting comment on that I hadn't thought about previously. So a friend of mine had posted something about the 12 years to avert climate catastrophe, and a comment had come up. Somebody had said, I was talking to a friend of mine about this, who said, well, surely if it was such a big catastrophe and it was so pending, it would be mainstream headline news on the BBC. it'd be in the news. It would be news. So I went and shared in his comment like screen grabs of, major British news sites, including the BBC, and it kind of isn't there.
Right.
Like 12 years is nothing, blink of an eye. You'd think that a major news agency for the United Kingdom would have Climate Watch maybe as a box, as a dial,
it's a bad news. Shouldn't that be a good story? If it bleeds, it leads. It's like planet Earth is bleeding. Maybe that should be.
I really genuinely hadn't thought about I hadn't thought about it in that context because for me it is headline news. And that's partly because of my self-created bubble and all that jazz that everyone keeps. The algorithms understand that I care about it. But I was like, well, yeah, why should people care? How are they going to understand the urgency in which they need to act if the news agencies who are responsible... And then we had our budget and it didn't get a mention. Nothing.
Like these news sites aren't even reporting the news.
No. So I was sitting there thinking...
It's fake news, Ivanka. That's why.
Yeah, it's true.
It's
not really happening. It's just a cycle of the planet. And, it's very natural. It's happened before. And, yeah. That's what I got on Twitter from somebody once going, "No, dear," she actually wrote.
Oh, no.
"No, dear, it's a natural cycle."
Have you seen the graphs?
Yeah, it's like...
Have you heard of the Industrial Revolution? Like what?
But I'm keeping an eye on the young folk and supporting them at the moment.
I've been thinking about this a bit more, and I think my biggest thing with climate has always been, I have like all of my interests are like this studio, like all my music gear, all my equipment is just... My carbon footprint is just, I don't know how to do anything. So I've written on a post-it note, 12 years, I've put a checkbox for carbon neutral studio. So I need to figure that out over the next couple of years somehow.
But I think a start of that, it doesn't, okay, we need to reduce our energy consumption, but we also need to shift to renewable energies. Like, a starting point could be the building your studios in, getting their energy from, someone like Ecotricity or Bulb or any of those people that...
Well, I think they might be up for that, actually. So,
yeah, because I think it's a selling point for them as well. I mean, that's one thing. Renewable energy doesn't mean you can just spend willy-nilly, in my view. But like my cousin who's staying with me at the moment, who's in her 20s, she's like, we were talking about climate change. I think it was post the election results. And she's like, can President Trump not just look out of his window? What are we, the 8th, 9th of November in Brighton, and it's warm. And my strawberry plants in the garden have got green strawberries on them. That is not normal. My strawberries are very confused.
Should we talk about meaning?
Yeah, we should.
How often do you think about meaning?
I actually think that I think about meaning quite a lot. One of the reasons I don't complete box sets is because I get up to like episode 4 and I go, what the fuck am I doing? Give us a shit. What is this
watching
adding
the wrong
to my
box
existence?
sets? There's a lot of empathy to be found in that you might not have had with the right box sets.
Maybe that's
I understand that instinct, and actually, whenever I play computer games, that's when it really kind of is. When I just get lost, I always just get lost, and I just think this is no good. Meanings that sort of like little core, like a nucleus of discomfort. That for me, like I start a new job, I'm excited I'm getting paid again. I'm excited to be, I guess, meeting new people, finding out what's going on, showing off a bit, like, look what I did. But as the job sort of like gets a bit more mature, this nucleus just starts to grow and grow and grow. And then within a few weeks, it's kind of all consuming. And I'm just like questioning absolutely everything and go, why am I wasting my short life on bullshit all day long? And I don't think that's necessarily a healthy way to live.
No, but that's what I was thinking of. Like, have you read Brave New World? The Aldous Huxley. They go on about this soma thing. So everyone's on drugs. So they all fulfill their role in society, but they're all on drugs. And I think there is definitely a choice to be made where you accept the world around you, take the soma and just unquestioningly continue to produce whatever it is you're working on without any questioning. And in some ways, I wish I could be more like that. But I've never been allowed to be like that. I've never been like, I was walking around thinking about the subject of meaning and manipulation and media and all these kinds of things, because obviously I'm always mentally preparing for our podcast on a Friday. And I was thinking about, in my home as a child, we were never allowed to watch telly without questioning what we were looking at and why we were being shown it, which, takes the fun out of a lot of things. So it's like, because my father was like, this is what they want you to do, this is what they want you to see, let's look at, even, I don't know, Dr. Zhivago, the movie, it was banned in the Soviet Union, because part of the story was a book first. In one part of it, they ridicule the Russian Revolution or the revolutionaries or what they turned into. But in the beginning of the movie, they're also ridiculing those serving classes, because the Russian Revolution didn't come out of nowhere. People were hungry. And so there's this scene in the movie where, Lara, the protagonist, is with this wealthy man up in the restaurant, and they're listening to classical music and they're all waltzing and dancing and drinking champagne, and the peasants are marching in the streets and being shot by the Tsar's army, and the guy that she's with just makes a big, so that it goes quiet in the restaurant, he makes a joke, and then all the rich people are ha 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 ha, they go back to their dancing. And there's this kind of, so when we watched that movie as children, we had to see what they're doing here. Can you see what's happening? This is what's happening here. Or, like Coming to America, when he stands on the balcony and good, look, Sammy, how free America is. People can throw their rubbish everywhere. I've never been allowed to just drink the soma and be off my face and go along. And I some days I wish I could.
Well, you think about meaning too much, and it does drive you to drink. It does, it is like booze calms it down, or you sort of smoke a lot of weed and you think about it and talk about it a lot, but then, you're not actually doing anything. Certainly, I think there's a close relationship between drugs and meaning.
Yeah, either escaping it or...
Yeah, like searching for it, go on your ayahuasca or whatever it is, and you have Carlos Castaneda in the desert spirit guide, all this stuff. Yeah. Don Juan, that searching for meaning.
That kind of side of things.
Yeah, Homer Simpson in the desert. But it's not really associated with, you're not really allowed to bring it up at work. Depends on the job.
Depends on the job. It depends on the organisation. It depends on whether the leadership of the organisation buy into the concept of meaning, or they're simply, pursuing growth, pursuing money. I think you can pursue money and meaning. I think that's entirely possible. I've always been a little bit discerning. I'm trying to think of the first place there was a proper conversation about what should consultants do if we have a client whose project they don't want to work on moral grounds. So we had that debate at Flow Interactive when I was there, because there was a potential to do a project for Shell and somebody didn't want to do it. And so there's that conversation about, actually, should we have a structure where you can go, I don't want to work on this. I think opening those conversations to meaning is interesting.
It's sort of like a pursuit you can have if you don't have to work all day, every day.
It's a luxury, but it shouldn't be a luxury. And that's where I think we should be able to build, I don't care how naive and idealistic I am, but we should be able to build a society where everybody can afford the basics so that we can spend more time working on meaningful things and things that will actually make people happier. The problem is, like in the country as it is at the moment, we've got, austerity, 0-hour contracts, child poverty, all these things that mean that people living who are directly affected by that can't have principles in the way that I can. because they have to survive. They're surviving. I'm sitting here going, oh, I'd really much rather work on that project because it's more interesting. So I appreciate that is a luxurious position to be in. But then I think because I'm in this luxurious position, I should be more discerning. And not just go, ha, 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 give me all your money. Let me sell you some shit you don't need.
I just do my meaningful stuff until I run out of money, and then I have to sacrifice my... I don't think there's any... I still haven't found the thing that didn't feel like I was sacrificing meaning for money. In the same way that one can find the meaning in almost anything.
Yeah, that's the other side of it, yeah.
Also, it tends to disappear as reality sets in.
You can find meaning in many places. So I think working on a meaningful... It could be the way the organisation is structured. Even though they're producing, something that's entirely trivial, but the way they've structured their organisation or the leadership team itself, or that they're just decent human beings working towards something, or they're trying to push a structure. So there's an IT consultancy type gang that I work with. I get work through them quite often. On the surface of it, they're an organisation that is just like anyone else, getting together contractors, pitching for projects, but actually they've tried to change their structure of the organisation behind it, the way they reward you. I've done introductions for them, and I didn't realise they paid a reward if you introduce somebody. And without me prompting in any way, they're like, hi, Vanka, can you send us an invoice? We owe you some money. Oh, do you? That's nice. So there's that kind of honest and open way of doing business that makes you a much more meaningful place to work for.
Well, is that meaning?
I think in trying to create a world where there's more things to work on that are meaningful, we need more organisations trying to challenge the existing structures. We might be sitting there charging more money and doing code or whatever we're doing, but we're still on a production line. It's just a bit more sophisticated.
Sometimes I wish we were on a production line and it wasn't just... We're just doing a load of work that comes to nothing, which feels like a lot of jobs. You stress your brain out. You're kind of subsumed in something for months, years on end, and then there can be nothing at the end of it. It's not like I'm making, I don't know, at least if I'm wiping profiteroles on a conveyor belt, they're going into a box and someone might eat them.
Okay, yes, there is that element, but I think the interesting thing about a conference like Meaning, which is kind of where all this started, is that they're challenging this acceptance that you go to work, you do work, you get paid, you go home, you watch a soap opera, you watch a box set, you go to sleep, you wake up, you buy shit, you go to work. It's like they're challenging this brave new world of blindly marching towards our death.
I would like to keep you satisfied. Celebrate the magic of our time. Why go round in circles when you could be fine? Some things happening as signs make you stop and think about your life. You couldn't see the pattern there for all the lines.
I watched a little Vox video this morning about the creation of the biohazard symbol.
Oh, yeah.
And about how they did all this research to find the most memorable symbol they could find that sort of met a certain number of criteria, but also didn't have any meaning attached to it already, which they could then use for the purpose of warning you about hazardous chemicals. Meaning is something we extract from symbols and events. A word can mean something very different depending on context. To different people, it can mean something different. The meaning of a symbol or the meaning of an event or the meaning of a job is entirely framed by you.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons machines are bad at understanding Like, they're getting better, but they still make stupid mistakes when presented with language, natural language processing or reading anything. They just don't understand, because to understand what written language means, you have to basically be a person that grew up as a human being in a certain culture, and machines just aren't quite there yet. They're just trying to do it superficially by grouping things, forming patterns separate from the actual existence, which means they'll always say stupid stuff.
That's made me a little bit more depressed, because I'm thinking about this in the week. I was thinking, right, okay, who in my extended family could I spark a conversation with about climate, or what makes me decide to buy this or not buy that, or those kind of things? Because if we say consumerism and consumption is one of the problems, right, what are we going to do? How can you explain why, if you buy a £500 handbag, to you it means that you're showing off some sort of symbol of something, and to me it just means over-consumerism and a waste of money and earth resources? It's like, how do you
transmit your meaning to someone else? How do you kind of get someone to see what something means to you?
Yeah, without it in any way being threatening or, a judgment on them.
Because you're potentially impacting huge areas of their history, of their upbringing, of their belief system. Just, you can comment on one thing, but the meaning that has to them is built off their entire lifetime of experiences. So, they're going to get defensive.
So how do we, perhaps we haven't also defined what, having a meaningful job means to us.
Right, and I think different people will have very different definitions, and even, like I touched on earlier, something I can find meaning in initially can start to lose it, or sometimes I can think, well, this is pointless, and then suddenly you find something, it's like, oh, well, that's kind of caught my attention. Yeah, there's no one job that is meaningful, and if your mother dies of one thing, then you'll be interested in that, and the things that will have meaning for you will be related to that. Making a lot of money has a lot of meaning to a lot of people because, again, going back to that impresses their dad, hopefully.
Yeah.
That's the meaning of that. Like, I got this bag because I always, or sometimes, or once, a nice man started talking to me and we got on really well. And now I always buy the most expensive bags because I did that before. And we do things because of anecdotal things in our history a lot of the time.
But I think for me, when I say that I am considering the meaning of something when I'm doing it, like, the original question was, how often do you think about the meaning? There's two things I think I'm contradicting. I don't think I agree with myself. So I was going to say originally,
do them in two different voices.
When you talked about the earning lots of money to please your dad thing, I was thinking, well, actually, then perhaps for me, the definition of meaning, that it has a positive impact, outside of me and my immediate family. So first I must satisfy my family, and survival and flourishing. It doesn't have to be survival. I need my family to flourish for me to fulfill part of my life's obligations. So let's say I've achieved that. Meaning for me then is, what can I do to do that and put some value back into the world, of which I don't gain directly. So in the context of making loads of money, of course you're achieving the, survival, your family flourishes. If I say something is meaningful or has meaning, it means it's more impactful on the world than that. It allows me to fulfill my obligations and add something back. But then when I say that I sit there watching a box set and I'm like, oh, why am I doing this? It's like, that feels more selfish. That's more about like what's happening to my brain while I'm watching this. When I say meaning, does it mean adding something back into the world? Or am I kidding myself and persuading myself that that's what I mean by meaning, when actually it's more to do with my own ego? I want to be seen as a person who adds something into the world.
Well, let me kind of explore the latter in terms of, I would say that music has become an extremely meaningful thing in my life, the making of it. And I think if you put that under a microscope, as with many artists, it sort of comes down to this idea that if I create something beautiful, then I will be lovable, then I can be loved, It's sort of, you can kind of get to that. But if you're being unkind to yourself. It's that I have an ego, that I think that something I make should have any, bearing on anyone else's day ever. And the meaning changes depending on what mood you're in.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's like this thing is, the meaning of it is that it's a trap that I'm stuck in, but I can't escape. But then, or it's just like, it is my experience that when I was, I always loved doing it, and I was always interested in it. And then when, I was a teenager, it was my first way of kind of getting out of being a complete sort of outsider to actually being part of something and having friends that I saw all the time, and we played music and we did things together. It's had that meaning attached to it. And then I think I may have said this before, but like, it's weird that I've got so fixated on the actual thing that I sort of almost lost the thing that gave it meaning in the first place, which was the social thing, which was the friends. I suppose in that respect, we can misattribute meaning. You can confuse the context that you've applied with the object itself. How upset you get if you accidentally flushed your wedding ring down the toilet is entirely proportional to how much you think that is the thing with the meaning, rather than the agreement that, the agreement you've made. And obviously different people will have very different reactions to that. Some people, I'm sure, would be utterly mortified by that, but then another person would be like, oh, it's just a bit of metal. It doesn't,
Go get a new one.
What's a formative, can you kind of trace back your current passions to an event like that? Therapy time.
It is therapy time. The environment thing, okay, climate wasn't particularly visible to me as being a thing when I was like 12, but I remember in Yugoslavia in school getting really upset in like a youth council meeting type thing, because everybody was laughing at this idea that we should go and clean up the park, which was full of rubbish. And I was like, you don't understand what I was crying, going, you don't understand, it's just terrible. And everyone was like, oh God, she's really serious. But I don't know if that came from, my mother used to make sure we did not litter and we did not throw things away. And it was that kind of, and my father taught us to be very respectful of the things that we owned. Like, we can't afford to buy that again. You have to look after your things. Looking after your things was a thing. You're not in this room, switch off the light. But then maybe some of that came from as well not having particularly lots of money. We've talked about that before.
Well, I think it sounds like you just had a good upbringing there.
Well, I think my parents did a decent job. I mean, who we are, that's what makes all policy, all politics, everything so complicated, is that, no, not complicated, complex, is because we're all completely a result of the exact makeup of our DNA within the context of our experience. And that just makes us all like, trying to explain why one person recovers from childhood trauma and another doesn't is really, really hard. Or trying to turn that into sort of a one-fits-all policy. So I think the meaning, and I was surrounded.
Meaning has never been more fragmented. Like, people's experiences have never been so fragmented as they are today, because it's experiences that grow you in it. And there used to be a lot fewer experiences available, and there's a lot of space in between. And now you sort of get to curate or pursue whatever kind of tangled web of progressions you want. And I'm talking about, again, like village, early agriculture. It's sort of like, well, you'll all see the amazing musician that came through town that year, and you'll all be affected by it.
I totally agree with you. Like, that there are fewer shared experiences. Yeah. Because we don't even go in, like, we're not even dictated to by the TV schedule anymore.
No.
Like, it's more like, oh, don't talk about last night's episode of so-and-so because I'm only on episode 1. So you can't even come in and go, oh, wow, did you see? Because don't tell me, I'm still catching up. We're totally killing all our shared experiences, which is probably killing a lot of empathy.
Yeah, sort of the erosion of any shared experiences is poison to empathy, is poison to sort of shared understanding. I was listening to Mark Maron interviewing Roger Daltrey, talking about how people used to sing all the time, sing together all the time. You'd walk up past any pub and there'd be people singing in there. And how just the act of singing, or even seeing a group of people singing, is actually really gets inside you. It's really, Mark Maron saying anytime he even sees a musical that he's not even that into, it'll kind of always make him cry, whatever it is. And so much of shared experience is, football matches, chanting, churches singing these hymns. And it's a shame that the lyrics, the words of the hymns are so serving of something that doesn't always have the best interests of the people singing it at heart. But I thought, maybe I could try and set something like, I don't know, like a secular church where it doesn't even have to be readings. It could be we're going to watch these 6 YouTube videos, and in between each one we're going to sing some secular something, and we'll make it a bit of a kind of like club, like fireworks display, visuals, kind of like immersive, interesting thing. But it will really be about just thinking about meaning, thinking and singing together. Like, is that something you could get people to do? Well, I'd resist it, but
there is that thing, that General Assembly, whatever it's called. There is something like that. I've not been along. I've read the description.
Yeah, I know Alan de Botton's sort of set something up.
There are things like this that clearly people feel the need to have. Choirs are really popular as an activity, which would support your argument.
Yeah.
Shouting along, because I wouldn't necessarily describe what I do as singing, but, that sort of shouting along to some music is such a brilliant feeling, even if you are, outside a pub. And it's not that abnormal in the sort of former Yugoslavs to people still be shouting along to some music in a pub. But you do it here as well, aren't you, if you're drunk enough and there's a jukebox?
People do it. It happens. I certainly don't do it.
No.
My grandfather played the church organ. He was a big role model. And I thought, well, it's not the church organ anymore, but it's sort of like the club is now, you're not the guy playing the organ so much, you're more sort of like the guy playing the music. The DJ, I guess, is kind of doing that role now. Obviously I have to make it too complicated. I should have probably just gone, I should be a DJ then. Modernising my grandfather's, the things I admired about him, and doing that would have a huge amount of meaning for me.
Yeah. Going back to one of our earlier points about ego, one of the things that I admire of the organiser or organisers, though I think it's mostly one woman, of Meaning Conference, is that she's not the front person. It doesn't seem to be herself that she is creating a platform for. Do you know what I mean? It seems to be, at best you see her at the end where whoever the host is persuades her to come out to receive a bunch of flowers and a round of applause.
It's not a platform for her to get famous.
No, which I think...
Unlike my church theory.
Another thing I listened to this week, it was part of my new favourite podcast I'm pushing this week. But it was a conversation with white evangelical women in the States that are moving away from Trump, who can't support Trump because of his stance on refugees. Because their standard default position is that they have to vote for the Republican representatives because Democrats are pro-choice. And therefore, that's their evil lies, so we must vote Republican. And then they see current Republican politicians quoting scripture to justify their treatment of refugees. And now, literally these women are saying, this is not the Jesus I recognise from what I know of Jesus. And my Jesus isn't like this. This is how dare you use scripture in this context. So they're starting to move away from Trump. They had a few of these people interviewed, and then they had a recording of one of these women phoning her father, who was also, obviously an evangelical Christian who votes Trump, pro-Kavanaugh, all these things. And this woman is trying to have a conversation with her father. They obviously love each other very much. They are a close family. She wants the approval of her father. He doesn't want to upset his daughter, but they completely disagree. Completely. And you listen to her trying to persuade him. And she's been, one of these women who's been at the border with America. And okay, I'm using all these examples for American politics, but this week is American politics week because they had the midterms. But she's at the border. She's telling him a story of being at the border and sitting there and speaking to a woman who got deported, and her child who stayed behind in the States attempted suicide at 9. And she's just trying to get back to her daughter. So she's telling her father this story, and her father's like, well, look, there are going to be isolated incidents where this is happening, but the majority are bad people trying to get into America. And they can't talk to each other. Like, you're listening to this conversation and you're like, their gravity is not in the same place. It doesn't work the same.
John Oliver showed some footage this week of just like a child being reunited with his mother and just saying, "You're not my mother anymore. You went away."
But this is it. This is what my
and we've said it. It's like how talk about a factory for unhappy people angry with your country.
Talk about a terrorist, mafia, criminal factory. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's like people that are going to be deeply, deeply traumatised for the rest of their lives.
Rightly so.
Fucking hell.
Maybe we've only got a limited mental capacity for meaning. And maybe that's why advertising is such a poisonous thing, because we are being bombarded by communication imbuing things with meaning that really should not have any meaning attributed to them. Which choice of toilet paper you buy should not be meaningful.
No.
And that's what advertising is, spends thousands of millions of pounds all day long to try and make us see meaning in absolutely meaningless stuff. At the cost, I think, as a new theory I'm just coming up with now, of actually looking for actual meaning. So people, I guess it's easy not to get that meaning drive triggered because it's being bombarded day and night by absolute nonsense. This perfume means you are lovable. What?
Yeah.
This vodka is different from the next identical vodka in that it will make you cool and interesting at parties instead of the heart and soul and life of the party. What a waste of our mental capacity.
So I definitely think that you've got a very, that the point around the fact that advertising kills our definition of meaning or adversely affects our definition of meaning and all that. Yeah. I don't know if that we only have a limited capacity for meaning.
Yeah,
I think
that was a separate.
That was a separate. That's too big. The advertising thing and too many things being imbued with meaning. Definitely, like going back to the the £500 handbag. I can imagine people buying a £500 handbag as this one step I've never gone to. I have done a few expensive pairs of shoes for sure. And in those moments, they have represented for me like a moment of, being able to afford it. being able to do it is like so there's that kind of, look at me, I've attained this level of, so I can't, but so there's lots of things attached to that. But then there comes a point where you also have to go, no, hang on, this also means start being sucked in by your bullshit. It's like, who was I talking to the other day? One of the quotes from one of the people is like, he said, obviously, I care less now about what people think of me. And part of that is psychology and part of that is age. And I think that being true to yourself and your values, there is a lot of value in self-reflection. Going, why do I think that? Because I think if you allowed yourself to self-reflect far enough, all of us would conclude that, in the making loads of money to impress daddy scenario that we mention regularly, like if that person self-reflected enough, they would come to the conclusion that actually their life is not about impressing their father, that's unhealthy and they need to move away from that. But you have to be prepared to do self-reflection. You have to be prepared to pause the soma, and that is scary.
Humans need meaning. And so in that sense, I kind of feel like that's maybe not being triggered as much as it could be. Although, no, you think about Game of Thrones, no one's introspecting.
But that's the thing that we're not doing. And like those of us who can afford to self-reflect should self-reflect, I think. That is like, I understand that it's not something everyone can afford to do, both financially, materially, emotionally, because it's not always a pleasant journey of understanding who you really are and what drives you.
Which is what you need to do in order to know what meaning,
so if you
understand the meaning you ascribe to things.
If you have enough therapy, it's like, as we've discussed previously, the importance of having therapy. There's a lot of tears and sweat involved in having therapy and a lot of darkness. So I understand that not everybody can afford to do that. But those of us who can, really, I think that's, we sort of owe it to ourselves and the world to do it. Because this is the thing, those people that are shouting for, Brexit and, the people who are shouting for getting rid of immigrants and who are shouting for various things, they have attached meaning and power and the feeling of fulfillment to that shared experience of shouting for something. Yeah. If Farage has achieved nothing, or Trump has achieved nothing, they've certainly achieved this, like, we stand together, we've created a tribe, we've got a chant, we know what we're going for. They've created there's definitely a market for a local tribe, which is what they're keying hard into, but at the expense of everything else. So I'm thinking, this is meaning part 1, pre-conference. Yes. So why don't we see what we think about this subject post-conference? And listeners, if you have listened to this one after the conference, subscribe and hear what we thought of the conference. Oh, wow, a cliffhanger.
A cliffhanger. Music. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. If you like the podcast, come to grandpodcast.com, subscribe, send us an email, hello@grandpodcast.com. Where can people find you, Ivanka?
At Ivanka on Twitter.
And you can find me at michaelforrestmusic.com, because I've done all the music.
If you could please write us some reviews or a big check.
A big check sounds good. Like, that would be, this is definitely a great source of meaning in my life. It's something that we've found, if nothing else, in the year since the last meeting, is sort of having this routine and I think positive, expensive effort every week. And we hope that other people get something out of it. I hope you did, whoever's listening.
Yeah. Anyway, episode 51.
And so next week will be a year, and we are thinking about switching it up a bit for the year 2, but we'll talk about that. I guess we'll discover that in time. All right, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.